Roanoke, the Lost Colony. After explorers found North America, they wanted to establish colonies on this new land. During the 1580s, the British made several attempts to create a colony. In 1585, a group of 100 men set sail for Roanoke Island after Queen Elizabeth decided she wanted to claim all of the land around Roanoke, what is now North Carolina. The men were to go and settle on Roanoke and create a colony. They immediately began building a fort and then houses that surrounded it. One of their biggest problems was that they arrived too late in the season to plant any crops. They had not brought enough supplies to last through the winter. They had to rely on the native people to help them. Unfortunately, the new settlers were not kind to the native people, which resulted in battles between the settlers and the Native Americans. When Sir Francis Drake sailed by the island in 1586, the settlers convinced him to take them back to England. 2 weeks later, the supply ship finally arrived at Roanoke to find it abandoned. They left 15 men from their crew at the fort the settlers had built. In 1587, a second group of 150 people left England to settle on Roanoke. This group was led by John White and included men, women, and children. The settlers did not want to settle on Roanoke, but the captain would take them no further. They landed there in July. They found the burned ruins of the earlier settlement, and the only sign of the 15 men left behind were human bones on the ground. The group worked hard to rebuild the settlement. Because they had landed there in July, it was again too late in the season to plant and harvest crops. Once again, the settlers had to depend on the Native Americans for help. Since the earlier settlers were unkind to the Native Americans a few years before, most of the tribes were not welcoming to the new settlers. One tribe, the Croatoan, did help the settlers survive. They were from a nearby island. Even so, John White knew he would have to travel back to England for more supplies if they were to survive on Roanoke. On August 18, 1587, the first English child was born in the colonies. Eleanor Dare, the daughter of Governor John White, had a baby girl. She was named Virginia Dare. 9 days later, John White took a few men with him to return to England for supplies. His hope was to return quickly, since he knew supplies were running low. Unfortunately, he could not have known the challenges he would face. Once John White returned to England, he began raising money for supplies and the return trip to Roanoke. He tried to do this quickly, but by the time he had raised enough money, he was unable to leave. In 1588, the Spanish and English were at war. Finally, in 1590, White and a few sailors sailed back to Roanoke. Along the way, the weather was rough, and they were involved in several sea battles. John White and his men arrived at Roanoke on August 16, 1590, to the sight of smoke coming from the island. Hoping that this was a good sign that his family had survived, White wanted to get ashore. However, due to terrible weather conditions and storms, he was unable to do so. They were able to see that the smoke actually came from a forest fire. Finally, on August 18th, he and a few men made it ashore. They found the island deserted, and it looked like it had been for quite some time. The houses had been taken down and buildings had collapsed. Before he had left, White had buried many of his belongings. On his return, he found that the chest he had buried had been dug up and the valuables were gone, while his books and maps were strewn about the settlement. The small boat he had left behind for the settlers was also gone. Before he had returned to England, he and the settlers had agreed that if they decided to move to another area, they would leave the name carved on a tree. If they were forced to leave the island, they would also put a cross in the tree. White did find a tree with the letters C-R-O on it. He also found another tree with Croatoan carved on it, but none of the men found a cross carved into the tree. White and his men did not know what this meant. He thought it may have meant that the settlers had gone to the neighboring island Croatoan to get help from the Native Americans there. White wanted to go to the island to see if his family was with the tribe. They set sail toward Croatoan but met bad weather. It was so terrible that the winds began blowing the ship back toward England. The crew had no choice but to go back to England. Exploration was very expensive during this time. White was unable to afford another voyage to Roanoke to try to find his family. In fact, there wouldn't be another expedition to North America until 1607. To this day, the mystery of what happened to the settlers continues. Some reported they saw fair-skinned people living on Croatoan Island. Others reported that there were settlements on the North Carolina shore that could have been White's family. Unfortunately, White never knew the fate of his family, and neither do we today. The mystery continues about the lost colony of Roanoke.